Good evening. I hope that you take an opportunity to watch this video for week 6 and 7, just in case we don't have class tonight. If we do, then this video will just serve as a short review for us so that you have a better understanding of the strategic planning process. I'm going to divide this recording up into several shorter segments so you don't have to watch one large recording all at once. You can look at kind of the bits and pieces that apply to your situation and that you want to learn more about. So sit back with a cup of coffee and I will be toggling the camera. Sometimes it will come on and sometimes it will go off. And so we'll give it a try and see how all of this goes. So here is what we're going to learn in week 6 and 7. We're going to learn more about what we learned last week with UWE's model of developing, deploying, and assessing a strategic plan. And what does UWE mean by strategy maps and how are they different from the CSIP strategies that are included in our plans in our districts? What's the role of the balanced scorecard, which is a Baldrige term we learned about last week in strategic planning? And what are strategies for implementing and deploying a plan? We'll also take an opportunity to review the strategic planning assignment for next week. And next week, really not at the end of class, but I'd like to do this at the beginning of the class to use a protocol to assess our understanding of UWE's strategic planning process. So this will serve as an assessment at the beginning of class next week, so make sure you take time to watch these videos segments so that you learn about that process. The purpose for us learning UWE's model of developing, deploying, and assessing a strategic plan, of course, is so that we become better as practitioners with strategic planning. It's also a question, as we've learned on our comprehensive exam, where you're going to have to actually take these steps of developing, deploying, and assessing a strategic plan and apply that to the situational question on your exam. So these are the 9 sections or 9 components that UWE describes in his book. So you'll want to make sure that you keep this slide and study this for your exam. And we're going to learn more about each one of these components tonight and next week. These are the functions of the stakeholder-driven strategic planning team that we learned about in week 5. So we talked about last week that the core planning team is basically the CSIP planning team in UWE's model. And the core planning team might vary a little differently from our CSIP committees because, as you know, the core planning team in UWE's model simply consists of the board members and the executive cabinet, or the cabinet at the central office administration level. So the administrative team at central office, if you will. So they're the ones who are really responsible for implementing the plan, and so that's why UWE recommends that they form your core planning team. The core planning team is responsible for developing the mission, the vision, and so we talked about mission and vision last week, and you saw an example of mission and vision with Larry Potterfield in the Baldrige process. You have examined your own mission and vision in your CSIPs, and we also took an opportunity to look at Columbia's mission and vision and saw how that very much aligned with the Baldrige model or Larry Potterfield's mission and vision. And we talked about kind of the strengths and the weaknesses of that. The core planning team is also responsible for doing that environmental scan. And if you remember, the environmental scan is a scan of the future, where you'll look at various demographic projections, what your demographics going to look like 5 years from now. You might create some scenarios of what you think your school district would look like 5 years from now, or you might read some research or other documents that depict what schools might look like 5 years from now. So that's the responsibility of the core planning team. The core planning team also develops a forced choice survey for stakeholders, which there's an example of your book in your UWE book on pages 18 and 19. And remember, there were some very limited survey questions that UE challenged us with, and I think there were only a total of 6 questions altogether. 4 questions were forced choice, multiple choice questions, and the other 2 were more open-ended. So take a look at those and see how that is applicable to the schools in your area. We learned that Elizabeth actually at the Ash Grove School District used those questions, which was fun, and she sent us those questions last week in an email. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. The core planning team, while this survey is being given to stakeholders, the core planning team simultaneously conducts what's called an internal audit, or an internal review self-assessment of school district performance against those 7 Baldrige areas. Next week, when we do meet in class, I'll show you what that assessment looks like, but actually it's in your book. I believe the internal assessment is on pages 27, 28, and 29 of your book. So this is a questionnaire that the core planning team takes, each of them individually. It's anonymous, so board members won't know what other board members are saying about this assessment, or the superintendent, or the other members of the central office team. But those results are analyzed, and then along with survey results, that's where the prioritizing and identifying key challenges from the environmental scan and the survey results come in. So, we talked about perhaps Pareto charts being used to help us identify those areas of need. So that is really, really important for us, because we know that there are always many more priorities than we can handle. So Pareto charts and other ways of prioritizing help us determine those priorities. So then we can develop those measurable student learning targets addressing the key challenges based on data-driven analysis and synthesis of the information. So student learning targets, let's see. Pareto charts are on pages 36 and 37 that help you identify priorities, along with pages 38 and 39. And I'm trying to move to the student learning targets. Examples of those student learning targets are on pages 44 and 45 of your book. So that's important to look at those student learning targets. They look very similar to CSIP objectives, except that UE calls them measurable student learning targets, and we talked a little bit about that last week. So this video concludes this segment of the strategic planning process, where the core planning team is responsible for doing all of these things. So this concludes this video, and so I'm going to turn it off before we move to our next segment.